All right, so ready to tickle those ivories.
Let's do it. Always up for diving into a new instrument.
We're all about piano for beginners today, folks. It's like everyone's had that fantasy, right? Just casually sitting down at a piano and bam, you're playing Chopin.
Oh, absolutely. It's the dream. And this guide, I
Mhm.
gotta say, it's pretty comprehensive. We're gonna
Yeah.
break it down, though, so you don't get overwhelmed. Think of it like we're giving you the express tour, hitting all the good stuff.
Love that. Express tour it is. All right, so step one, gotta grab yourself a piano. But even that decision can be kind of, I don't know, overwhelming. Acoustic, digital, keyboard. It's like, where do you even start?
It's like walking into a candy store, but for music.
Yeah.
Our guide definitely has a thing for those classic acoustic pianos, especially the grand pianos. But let's be real, those are for when you're, like, really serious.
Yeah, not exactly a beginner-friendly budget item, or size for that matter. I mean, if you're living in a tiny apartment, a grand piano is going to be a tight squeeze.
Talk about a room with a view, or no room at all.
Exactly. So that's where I think the guide brings up a really good point about the whole feel of the keys, especially for someone just starting out. Those weighted keys on a digital piano, those are crucial, apparently.
Oh, 100%. It's all about that authentic feel, mimicking the resistance of an acoustic. It's like
Mhm.
imagine learning to type on like a touch screen and then trying to use an actual typewriter. Total hand cramp city.
Totally. You'd be like, where's the delete button on this thing? Speaking of different feels, keyboards. The guide definitely gives them props for being, well, portable.
That they are. If you're like someone who's always on the go or maybe just short on space, a keyboard's a great option. Although one thing I thought was interesting, the guide mentions that even if you think you'll end up buying online, it's worth it to actually go to a music store and try some instruments out.
Oh, for sure. It's like you wouldn't buy a car without test driving it, right? Your instrument, that's just as important.
Totally. Plus, those music store folks, they're usually pretty passionate about their instruments. They give you some good advice.
Always good to have a musical wingman or wingwoman. All right, so we've got our instrument, we're feeling those keys, but how do we actually read the music? Like it's a whole different language.
It's like deciphering a secret code. But that's what makes it so fascinating, right? Our guide, Piano for Beginners, breaks down this musical language, starting with something called musical notation. Think of it like the written form of music.
Okay, so if the piano is like our instrument, musical notation is like our instruction manual. What are the key elements we got to learn to understand it?
The guide does a really good job of explaining the 5 core components. You've got the staff, the clef, the key signature, the time signature, and of course the notes themselves.
Okay, there are some serious music-y words in there. I remember when I first started learning, it was like, whoa, information overload. Let's start with the staff. What is that exactly?
So the staff, that's those 5 horizontal lines you always see in sheet music. Think of it like the foundation, the blank canvas where all the other musical symbols go.
Okay, so it's like the stage where the musical notes come to life. What about the clef? The guide mentions a treble clef. Is that like the key to understanding the notes on the staff?
Exactly. It's like a signpost telling you which notes correspond to which lines and spaces on that staff. The treble clef, that fancy symbol at the beginning, it's usually for higher pitched notes, like those you'd play with your right hand.
Right, like the melody usually.
Often, yeah. And then you have the bass clef for those lower notes, the ones your left hand usually handles.
Makes sense. Okay, so the clef tells us where the notes live on the staff. What about that key signature? That one always seemed kind of mysterious.
It's like a musical shortcut. Instead of writing a sharp or flat symbol next to every single note, the key signature, those sharps or flats at the very beginning of the piece, tell you which notes are going to be automatically sharp or flat for the whole song.
So it's kind of like if a song is played in the key of, let's say, C sharp, the key signature tells you all the C notes will be sharp without having to mark them individually.
Exactly. Saves you a lot of writing, right? And then we've got the time signature, which might sound intimidating, but it's really just about the rhythm.
Oh, okay. So like how fast or slow the song is.
It tells you how many beats are in each measure, which is like a little unit of musical time, and which kind of note gets one beat. It's like setting the heartbeat for the entire piece.
That makes more sense. It's like some songs you can just feel the pulse, like you could dance to them.
Exactly. And a lot of that comes down to the time signature.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay, and then the stars of the show, the actual notes themselves.
Yes. The guide does a great job of explaining how different note symbols represent different lengths of sound. How long you hold a note. It's like musical fractions.
Ah, so a whole note is like a whole pie, a half note is half a pie, and so on.
You got it. It's all about those relative lengths, creating those patterns of sound that we recognize as music. And don't worry, the guide has a super helpful chart with all the common note types and how long they last.
Visual aids are the best. Now, the guide also mentions something called ledger lines. What are those all about?
So ledger lines, they're like those extra lines above or below the staff. When a note is really high or really low, it's like extending the range of the staff.
It's like adding extra floors to your musical house when you've got more notes to fit in. This is great. I feel like I'm actually starting to understand this
You're
stuff.
getting it. And now that we've covered the basics of individual notes, we can move on to scales and chords.
Hmm.
Those are like the real building blocks of music.
Oh, yeah, scales. Those things you hear people practicing, and it sounds kind of like, well, just scales.
Exactly. But they're important because they train your fingers and help you understand how different notes work together. Think of scales as musical exercises for your fingers.
Like finger push-ups. So if scales are the exercises, are chords like putting those exercises into action?
Kind of. Chords are three or more notes played together at the same time, and they're what give music that harmonic richness. They're like the chords you strum on a guitar, but on the piano you press multiple keys at once.
Okay, so it's like scales build the muscle memory, and then chords bring in the real musicality, the emotion.
You got it. It's all coming together. The guide starts with the most basic scale, which is the C major scale. It only uses the white keys, so it's a good starting point for beginners.
Right, makes sense. Start simple. I remember my first piano teacher, she was really big on scales. Like we'd spend what felt like hours on them. But I get it now, it's like laying the foundation.
Exactly. The C major scale. Think of it as your musical alphabet. And just like you use the alphabet to form words, you use scales to play melodies and create those beautiful musical phrases.
Speaking of beautiful musical phrases, chords. The guide talks about major and minor chords. Those seem pretty essential, right?
They are. I mean, think about it. Most of the music we hear can be broken down into major and minor chords. Major chords, they tend to have that bright, happy sound.
Like happy birthday, that's a major chord, right?
Exactly. And then minor chords, they bring in that, I don't know, a bit of a darker or maybe more, I guess you could say, melancholy feel.
Yeah, like if you were going to write a song about like a rainy day, you'd probably use a minor chord.
Exactly. It just sets a different mood. The guide actually goes into detail about how those chords are built using intervals and semitones. It might sound a little technical, but it's actually pretty fascinating once you get the hang of it.
Yeah, once you understand the why behind the what, it's like, oh, okay, I see how it all fits together, like learning the grammar of music.
Exactly. Once you get those basic building blocks, you can start to recognize those patterns in the music you hear.
That's got to be such a cool feeling, like being in on the secret. Okay, so we've got our scales, our chords, we're feeling confident. What's next? Does the guide just like set us free in the world of piano music?
Well, not exactly. The fun part is it dives into different genres. You have pop, blues, jazz, classic. It's like a musical buffet. Gives you a taste of everything so you can start to explore what speaks to you.
I love that. It's like, okay, you've got the basics down, now go out and make some musical magic.
Exactly. And what's cool is the guide doesn't just give you a quick overview. It actually highlights what makes each genre unique. Like for pop music, it talks about those catchy melodies, the ones that get stuck in your head. And then for blues, there's all that soulful expression, those blue notes that give it that distinct flavor.
Oh yeah, the blues, gotta love that. And then jazz, that's where things get really interesting.
Right. Jazz is all about improvisation, those unexpected twists and turns. The guide even talks about swing rhythm, which gives jazz that infectious, danceable feel.
Man, I'm starting to feel inspired. It's like piano isn't just about playing the right notes, it's about finding your own voice, your own style.
Absolutely. That's what makes music so powerful.
Hmm.
And the guide emphasizes that, it's not about being perfect. It's about experimenting, making mistakes even, and having fun with it.
Yeah, embrace the journey. Speaking of which, I noticed the guide talks about using technology like recording software as a learning tool. Are you a big fan of recording yourself playing?
Huge fan. It's so helpful, especially when you're first starting out. It's like you don't always hear what you're playing objectively when you're in the moment. But when you listen back to a recording, it's like, oh, okay, maybe I need to work on that part a little more.
Totally. It's like having your own personal practice coach. The guide mentions some good options too, like GarageBand, which is free on Mac, and Audacity, which you can use on like anything.
Exactly. Super accessible. And on top of that, the guide talks about the importance of finding your musical tribe, like joining an online community, finding a practice buddy, maybe even getting a teacher if you're feeling really ambitious. Having that support system can make a world of difference.
It's like we're all in this together. Well, this has been fantastic. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of the piano world. But In the best way. This Piano for Beginners guide, it's like it gives you the map, the compass, and the snacks for the journey.
Love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's comprehensive, but also super accessible. It really is a great resource for anyone who's ever wanted to learn piano.
All right, folks, there you have it. Piano for Beginners. Go forth and make some music.